Good evening, everyone. My name is Rebecca McCaffrey, and I'm the current president of the Montana chapter of the Society for Conservation Biology. On behalf of the whole board of the Montana chapter, it is my sincerest pleasure to welcome you to our first ever research symposium. Montana SCB is a local chapter within the larger Society for Conservation Biology, which is comprised of a global network of conservation professionals. Our chapter was originally formed in 2000 in Missoula and has developed the mission of promoting science and the application of the principles of conservation biology to Montana's local, regional, and statewide diversity. We have focused on 3 areas. The first is education and outreach. For example, we have designed and implemented a course on conservation education and hosted community film screenings in town. Secondly, we've worked in public policy, where most recently we submitted comments on the proposed delisting of the gray wolf. And third, we work in conservation science, where we have hosted several speakers presenting on regional conservation and biodiversity topics, and most recently, of course, in planning this event. This symposium is an effort to bring together conservation scientists and professionals from around our region to share ideas and research projects. We have people presenting from Alberta, Idaho, and Montana during tomorrow's schedule. If you're interested in attending tomorrow's part of the symposium and have not yet registered, we do have a few spaces left, so please come see us at the registration desk after tonight's lecture. Also, tonight's talk will be videotaped by Missoula Community Access Television as part of its Media Assistance Grant Program to nonprofit organizations. For more information about this grant program, please contact MCAT at 542-6228. Finally, I am pleased to announce that there will be a reception and poster session following the lecture in the lobby right outside. The reception is co-sponsored by the Wildlife Biology Program, the Division of Biological Sciences, and the College of Forestry here at the University of Montana. We thank them profusely and invite you to join us for a drink and further conversation after tonight's talk. And now I would like to invite Adam Sotowski, our Vice President, who will introduce tonight's speaker.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. Tonight I have the pleasure to introduce our plenary speaker, Dr. Joel Berger. And Joel Berger received his PhD from the University of Colorado, and after 7 years at the Smithsonian Institute, was a professor at the University of Nevada for 16 years. Joel then worked for the Wildlife Conservation Society, where he led several projects, including the Saiga Antelope Conservation Project in Mongolia, as well as the Pronghorn Migration Corridor Conservation Project in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Joel has published more than 20 research articles in our society's journal, Conservation Biology, and he's ranged on a variety of topics from black rhinos to the restoration of ecologically effective carnivore populations. Joel has published books on wild horses, rhinos, as well as bison, and his latest book, The Better to Eat You With, Fear in the Animal World, was released last month, and actually a few copies will be available out there for $25 a piece. Hardback, good deal. And Joel Berger is currently the John J. Craighead Chair of Wildlife Conservation at the University of Montana here, and he will be presenting a talk entitled Ecological Symbolism and Conservation, Can America Protect Wildlife Corridors? Would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Joel Berger?
I guess it's working. Hi. Kind of working. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've been on the faculty for slightly less than a year. And before I interviewed, I knew that the faculty here was great, that Missoula was a good town, and that the University of Montana had a great reputation for its conservation and wildlife programs. What I didn't know was the hidden talents and the passion and professionalism of its graduate program. And so I want to thank Rebecca McCaffrey, Adam Spitalski, Ellen Chang, Jody Tucker, and others who have been on the board for the local chapter of the Montana Society of Conservation Biology. And it's a great pleasure to be here. And before I start talking about this, I want to offer a little bit of some background. I remember a couple of years ago, a student came up to me and asked what my philosophy was about doing conservation. What kind of advice did I have? And I thought about that, and it was a good question. And I didn't have an answer, and so I punted. I didn't answer the question. Instead, what I did was I handed it back, and I said, so how do you do biology? Or how do you do ecology? You know, what is your philosophy? And then I followed up by asking, do you work in specific sites? Do you target a specific area? Do you ask general questions? Do you pick a species? Do you pick ecological processes? How do you proceed? How do you choose how you're going to do studies or how you will do biology? And I know for me, if I'm working abroad, what I try to do is I'll go visit local people, whether they be herders or farmers, people in rural places living on the land, and try to get their idea for what they think are the important issues and the value of wildlife or biological diversity. But at the same time, I'll go talk to the governments as well. Sorry about this. It's put it there. We'll try that. Okay. And I'll go talk to the governments and ask them, the top officials or their scientists or their natural resource board, what they see from their perspective. It's real different in this country, as everybody, I think, knows. America is a very litigious society. Science plays a role, the courts play a role, and we move back and forth and back and forth. And I know that when I was living in Wyoming 6 or 7 years ago and trying to figure out what it is that I could do and use whatever kind of presumptive talents I might have to try to make a difference, I started thinking about the greater Yellowstone system where I was living, the fact that it's 60,000 square kilometers, that animals move across it. And that's one of the last places. I mean, here in the Northern Rockies, we have those opportunities as well, but I wasn't living here then. And so I started to ask, what is it that I can gather some data on with my colleagues where we can actually use this and try to move it towards some policy goal? And so I'm going to talk about that tonight. The title of my talk has the word symbolism in it. Let's have a show of hands. What does that symbol represent? Who knows what organization it goes with? Okay, most everybody. Good. I was going to ask if it was TNC. I was going to ask if it was Audubon. I was going to ask if it was Sierra Club. You guys know. It's WWF, World Wildlife Fund. Great marketing, great passion, great visibility. We're going to do a segue. I want you to remember symbols. We're going to come back and end on symbols. Can we turn down the lights, please? I think for those of us who are interested in taking our science and making it applied, there's a challenge. You know, we could work in, we'll say, a park or a protected area, which I've shown here. And we know that parks and protected areas have roads. And we certainly don't see the eruption of gas fields and oil rigs in most of our parks. In some parts of the world, though, we do see that. We can certainly do the science and try to understand impacts. And there's no question we can do that effectively. So whether we're working in parks or outside of parks, the real conservation issues, though, deal with people. And conservation, in my mind, is people. If we can't change attitudes, if we can't get policy to move, if we're not doing something that ratchets it up a little bit more, then we're not really doing conservation. I'm going to spend some time talking about migration and migration spectacles. These are springbok. They used to occur, and they still occur in parts of southern Africa. Their migrations are not nearly as long as they used to be. The first slide was showing wildebeest from Serengeti, and we'll come back to that. There are populations of migratory elephants that still can move up to 100 miles, 160 some kilometers. We know that caribou in the porcupine herd move up to 1,200 miles. In Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, there's something on the order of 100,000 elk. On average, those out of the Jackson Hole region are moving over 100 miles in their migrations, round trip. Pronghorn, another migratory species in most places. But then there are lots of migratory spectacles, winged spectacles. There are certainly marine mammals that do long migrations, cetaceans in particular, gray whales, birds. This is not a migration, it's a roundup in the Lamar Valley in the 1930s, but bison used to migrate, and they still certainly show seasonal movements in the areas where they can. And going back, we have semi-nomadic herders that are migratory, going up into the mountains, coming down, sometimes moving 50 kilometers, 50 miles, 80 kilometers or more. Why do animals migrate? Lots of reasons. Avoidance of deep snow, escaping insects, escaping predators some of the time, trying to. Finding adequate food. And if we look across the globe, we know that as we go from 6.5 billion people to 7 billion, we're going to continue to constrain the processes that support migration, as well as a lot of other activities and biological diversity. We've lost lots of migrations. And there are numerous reasons. Habitat. This was a Mark Hebblewhite photo from up in Canada. Energy development. Intolerance. White-tailed jackrabbits have been migratory. Sorry, I'll take that back. Black-tailed jackrabbits are known to migrate. These are white-tailed jackrabbits in Kansas around 1890. Rural sprawl. And fences, of course, including a new one for security. And roads. And the pronghorn in the top right corner, 27 were killed by a pickup truck, not a super huge semi-rig, but just one pickup truck killed 27 a couple of years ago in Wyoming. So where are the last great migrations? Lots of caribou migrations still across circumpolar regions, both in Siberia as well as the Canadian and American Arctic. Wildebeest and zebra in Serengeti, the wildebeest moving about 400 miles a year. A recently rediscovered migration in southern Sudan in the Sud, which is a very wet zone. It's about 400 miles east of Darfur. And these are white-eared kob, and when they were studied about 20 years ago, they were moving about 700 kilometers round trip. Mongolian gazelles out on the eastern steppes, where there are more than a million individuals. Chiru in western Tibet. Saiga in Kazakhstan, in Kalmykia in southern Russia, as well as in Mongolia. And pronghorn. So what do we do? How do we put science in place? How do we try to move the public if indeed it is a public issue, to conserve these spectacles that require a lot of space. So I'm going to offer 2 case studies. I'm going to talk about some of the work that my colleagues and I have been doing on pronghorn in the Yellowstone system, as well as on saiga out in western Mongolia. Regional setting. I'm going to focus on the area below Yellowstone Park, Grand Teton, and all the way down into what's known as the Upper Green River Basin. A little bit of background. Pronghorn have migrated into the Grand Teton area for at least 6,000 years. We know that because of archaeological finds, hunting sites, which have been dated. How important is connecting summer and winter ranges? I talk about migration, I talk about connectivity, and I'm referring to movements. Michael Schwartz, who's an adjunct professor here, he talks about gene flow. So somewhere in between is probably the less polar extremes that Mike and I represent. What I'm going to do is to show what we have known about migrations into and out of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, winter and summer ranges. So those are reflected here. This is what currently remains. I'll do that again. So this is what we had at one point, about 80 years ago, and this is what we now have. And the one in the top left part, just to the north and west of Yellowstone, is Madison Valley, and that's about ready to blip out. Why do we care about protecting this corridor? Well, I guess first and foremost is that most national parks have a bit of a hard time containing their large mammals that move in and out just because large animals have larger home range requirements. And so all parks, not all parks, but many parks face a common problem. They can't manage land outside their borders. And because of this, there's a real dilemma in terms of not watching populations just shrink and go through attrition and finally become locally extinct. Second reason that we care, when I say we, it's proverbial me. It's maybe not you, but it's my colleagues and me, is that if we can save these spectacles, it gives us opportunities to not only showcase them for the American public, but to send an international message. If we're telling Panamanians to live with jaguars, and if we're telling Africans to live with elephants, you know, we probably need to do something to suck it up here at home and to live with pronghorn. So, the first issue that we had to deal with is how do you delineate a corridor? And so, the work that I'm going to talk about has been collective with Steve Kane at the National Park Service, Kim Berger, who is at that point working with Wildlife Conservation Society. And so standard methods, bring in the Black Hawks, you net gun animals, you tie them up, you put a GPS collar on, and you release them. Why a GPS collar? Because GPS collars give us very detailed data up to a point every 3 hours as they're migrating, so we can look at the nuances of how they move through potentially complex landscapes. We let the animals define the route. And so in the top left-hand corner is Grand Teton Park, where you see Pinedale. That's about 100 miles distance, just to give you a sense of scale. And so we let the animals define the route. This is the only route that remains. The others, as you recall, have been sealed up by human activity. So what are the bottlenecks? Well, there are at least 3, and so let me describe what these look like. The first is the Red Hills bottleneck, Grand Teton in the background. That's where the animals go to summer. They don't summer in the mountains, they summer out on the flats because pronghorn are not necessarily mountain or montane ungulates. Every animal in the population passes through this box, 191 meters wide. At least this is based on our GPS data. And so it's a pretty constrained area that they all flow or move through. This is another view looking at it, and there's that same box. They don't go into that valley anymore because of human disturbance, and so they're moving across the cliff faces. They also go over a hydrographic divide at 8,000 feet. I know that we don't think of pronghorn as using forest, but the animals that we work on do go through about a quarter of a mile of spruce and lodgepole. Then they also have to navigate the funnel. The funnel is this area shown here. It's about 120 meters wide. It's an area between riparian and between forest and road. And so every animal that is moving north goes through an area slightly bigger than a football field. And so to sum up where we're at so far, the migration one way is about 120 miles, and it's the longest that we know of for a terrestrial mammal in the US. In fact, we can drop all the way down to Tierra del Fuego because there are no other terrestrial mammals that show longer migrations. In Canada, there are some. So, Red Hills bottleneck, there, funnel. Trapper's Point, the area where the archaeological sites have reflected 6,000 years of hunting in use. It's a strange mix, it's a strange mix, and it's a complicated landscape for doing conservation. As I said, conservation issues in parks tend to be fairly intense, but as soon as you get outside of parks, they become a lot more difficult. So we've got Park Service, Grand Teton, we've got Forest Service land. Dropping below the Forest Service, we've got private landowners, and then finally we have BLM land. And keep in mind, this is where they come to winter, because snow is less. So we've dubbed this or coined this something that people, the public, can get their handle or get a handle on and just call it the path of the pronghorn. And it's a linear path, as you can see. And there's some key points here. First of all, the route is invariant. This is really important because it makes planning less difficult. Not only has it been used for 6,000 years, but we have our empirical data for 6 years showing that indeed this is the only route that is traversed. How long does it take to migrate? I'm going to build us a little video here. Okay, so notice that we're at October 6th. When we get to October 30th, things are going to move real fast. The animals up here are staging. They're getting ready to move. We're almost there. They're going to start moving real fast for fall migration. So don't blink. They're done. 90 miles, 3 days. They're moving faster than caribou do. So that's to get to winter range. I'm going to show you two more. I'm going to show you what they do on winter range, and then I'm going to make a final point when they come north again. So every animal shoots through, does it on average 3 days. Some do it more quickly. During winter, which is where we are, the animals are moving around looking for sites with less snow. So when we've gone down and tracked these animals and matched them up with our snow depth measures, the key driver in terms of what they're doing in the winter is basically avoiding deep snow so that they can have food. As soon as we get to March, and we're in March, they're getting ready to go north. And notice that they're moving slowly, and I'll sum up why in a second, and then I'll kind of bring it back to some conservation issues. So they're moving through the funnel, just went through the funnel, moving north towards the park. Here's an aberrant individual here, trying to cross over 11,000-foot mountains or go through a canyon. Can't go through the canyon because too many roads, too many people. So now it's trying to cross what's called the Gravant Range. They're about 11,500 feet, so maybe 3,500 meters. Can't get over. Starts to turn around, comes back, and now is going to shoot through and get to the park. All right. The reason that's relevant is we showed this video to the governor. He didn't care about the data. As soon as he saw that, he was a believer. One, science and technology are good, which is a good thing. Didn't care about any publications. He knew what he saw was enough. Whatever it takes, I felt good. Okay, so let me sum up here. So, on average, fall migration, 3 days. It's spread out across the population over about a 5-week period, but individuals are moving quickly. Spring, much more slower, relax. On average per individual, it's about a month. The span is slightly more than 2 months. Summer and winter, no movements. The difference, as the animals are moving towards the Tetons, they're basically following the snow line. And so as the snow's melting off, they're picking up highly nutritious plants and nitrogen. So key traits of the corridor. It's about 90 miles long, slightly over a mile wide. Thinking about conservation. So we know what needs to be done. We know where the bottlenecks are. Most of the land is public land. So why have we not been successful in getting this protected? Why are we failing? So keep that in mind, because I'm going to come back to that. So symbols, failures. Those are the two things we're going to come back to. All right, pronghorn, I'm going to shift gears and go west. We're going to go to Central Asia, saiga. Saiga are the world's most northern antelope. And they used to occur in the late Pleistocene with a lot of other species, some of which are still around, some of which are not. But the interesting thing about saiga is that they were once North American. And when they occurred in North America, they were with woolly mammoths, and they were also with musk oxen. So they were one of the fatales of climate change. Habitat change, about 26,000 years ago is the last known saiga in North America. What does saiga have in common with rhinos? That seems like a bizarre question. Let's think about rhinos for a second. So 1940, there were probably 60,000 black rhinos in Africa. 1970, there were still 30,000 black rhinos. Then their horns became subjects of traditional medicines, or in Yemen, for dagger handles. And so there was a major onslaught, and about 97% of the black rhinos were poached in a 20-year period. So enter a conservation organization, whose name I will not say. They advocated, well, you know, there's still a lot of saiga in the world. And so those numbers on the y-axis, those are 200,000, 400,000, up to, so you can see about 1 million saiga. And so the argument came forth, God, there are a lot of saiga out there. Why don't we use saiga horns? You know, let's go with saiga horns. That's a better idea. So, okay, that might have helped rhinos, but it didn't really. Other things helped rhinos. But this is what happened to saiga. In a 15-year period, we went from over 1 million down to about 50,000 saiga. So saiga have been poached pretty heavily. 2 subspecies. The one in Mongolia has about 3,000 animals. The one in Kazakhstan and Kalmykia, about 50,000. The one in Kazakhstan and Kalmykia are critically endangered by the IUCN. The reason for this being that the drop was so precipitous. The one in Mongolia, only 3,000. They're still classified as endangered, but they're not as critically endangered. And there's a person in the audience, Li-Shu Li, who used to work on saiga horn trade issues out of Beijing. And we're lucky that we have her here as a graduate student. Okay, so Mongolia. We instigated a program in Mongolia. Mongolia is an area about 2.5 times the size of Alaska, pretty large area, mostly rural-based economy. Pockets of spectacular wildlife, lots of challenges on the landscape. Historic saiga distribution in Mongolia was something like this, the Altai Mountains rimming on the left side of the screen. This is current saiga range, and this is the one park dedicated to protect them, but parks in Mongolia are not like parks in this country. It's a paper park. No signs, no boundaries, no law enforcement, no rangers. This is the Sharon Reserve. People, yaks, camels, sheep, goats, people making a living because they need to. When we first went over there in 2005, we started with the local perspective. We met with WWF folks, we met with the mayor of local towns, we met with herders, and we met with people living in gers. We also developed community support, spending a few days in different communities talking about the importance of wildlife to their existence, whether they cared, engaging them in frisbees. And we visited a lot of herders in their gares as well. So our project goals were to evaluate the adequacy of the Sharon Reserve, which we also had discussed with government officials before we went out into the bush. We were interested in identifying population sizes so we could get a handle on whether or not enforcement efforts were making a difference, and also to ask questions about migration. And then finally, we wanted to go beyond. We wanted to see if there were ways to increase the capacity of the people living on the landscape to appreciate and support conservation of biological diversity. So the first challenge, of course, is, well, what does it mean to evaluate the adequacy of a reserve? You know, are we going to ride camels? How are we going to go out and study saiga? Now, keeping in mind that here we use radio collars, here we use helicopters. There are no private airplanes in Mongolia. There are no helicopters in Mongolia. There are no capture teams in Mongolia. And so one possibility was camels, which we were not really optimistic about. Another were Russian vehicles, which offered a little bit more. And then finally, let's see, is that what I wanted? Yes. Capturing saiga presents a problem. First of all, nobody has done it, and so there's not a book we can go to figure out how to do this and handle them as an endangered species. And then the topography is fairly rough. And they do occur at the base of glaciated mountains, but what looks like it might be gentle terrain is not. But we did manage to pull together a team of first-rate handlers and muggers and camel riders and drivers. And so how did we go about capturing saiga? Well, we first looked for the gentlest terrain we could find. And then we strung 400-meter nets below high points. And we found wooden sticks that we could support them with. And then we used our vehicles and people on top of slopes, which you see here with two-way radios, and guided the animals in for distances up to 4 to 5 kilometers. And so from those distances, we weren't quite sure where the nets were. Hence, we were using the two-way radios and spotters. Saiga in net. Saiga being handled by a couple of our field crew. And I should point out that we went and practiced this with domestic goats and tried to point out that these animals can die. They're an endangered species, that the techniques we use on domestic goats are not the techniques that we want to use on saiga. And so we used no drugs. We wanted to handle the animals, release them within 4 minutes. So as soon as we had a face and eye cover, you know, they did not struggle very much. So we released mother and young when we would capture them together. We tried to just go for solitaries. We tried not males because, as we all know, females are the more important part of most societies, and so we wanted females collared, and we did. We were also interested in working with local people and increasing capacity. So we taught them how to do radio telemetry. We bought a couple of Russian motorcycles so that people that we were employing could actually go out and follow animals. We bought them uniforms of sorts. So what did we learn? So the Sharon Grove, or the Sharon Reserve, is shown here. Its lines. The Altai Mountains are on the left, the rugged areas. And you can see that based on our spot points, saiga have moved around a fair amount. We don't have a scale on that. Sorry about that. So the distance from the bottom here to the very top of the screen is probably about 120 miles, so about 200 kilometers. So pretty large area. We identified potential bottlenecks. And we were interested in the capacity of animals moving north and maintaining a metapopulation structure, because although this dedicated reserve is there, there are some other population segments and there's some movement back and forth. And so we wanted to be sure that at least we knew how to delineate areas that would be important to maintain connectivity. How is this information helping to protect pronghorn and saiga? And you can see some similarities other than the nose, but grassland equivalent herbivores. Pronghorn about twice the size, by the way. So there are some reasons for optimism. First of all, we convened a workshop, and we had the governors of 2 provinces there. So this might be the equivalent of the Arnold Schwarzenegger, and this would be the equivalent of the Brian Schweitzer. And they came, and they're very interactive. And it was pretty amazing, because in this country, you're lucky if you can gain access to anybody at some high level. And yet we had the governors there for 2 days. And so it was a really good opportunity to interact. We also brought in others. We brought in the chief of police. We brought in a couple of scientists from the Mongolian Academy of Sciences, and overall we invited a lot of herders and local people. And so you had an entirely wild mix of people. You have herders with an 8th grade education, you have elected officials, you have governors, you have police, you have veterinarians, and you have PhD level scientists. And the beauty is it's almost all Mongolian. We've also been working with their Academy of Sciences, helping their publications. And so this is the government end of trying to drive things, making information available. We've gotten some publicity on this, some media outreach, USA Today amongst other places. And that's good for fundraising, and that's good for being here in the States or in westernized countries. I think UK picked up a couple of stories, and so did the Germans. But we were disappointed, and so what we did instead was we had our work and publications and outreach translated into the 5 range states, countries that have saiga, so that the local people have access to the reports. And what we did was we did gray literature papers. You don't get rewarded in this system for that, but you do get rewarded for achievement. And so we do our publications, and then we also take them and make them available to the public in 3- and 4-page written comments that they can understand, minus the data and the stats. So, challenge, moving from science to conservation. Why did we fail in terms of protecting this migration corridor? Are people really caring about it, or are they just drinking their beers? Well, the real challenges are, and I mentioned at the very beginning of my talk, we live in a litigious society. Do we really want the anvil from Washington, D.C. saying, oh, this should be protected? Or do we want to engage the local populace? And where in between do we move, or do we not? So some of the challenges are people who've been there for 3 and 4 generations, they don't like scientists, and they're somewhat xenophobic and don't like people with long hair and not in cowboy boots. But not all. Some of the other challenges are trying to convince rural-based economies why something that has been around for a long time, as long as they can remember, and certainly the indigenous inhabitants who have been there for 10,000 years before, that some of these species may be under threat. And then another challenge is working at a higher level, whether we're dealing with expert hunters or secretaries of interiors. So the challenges are real. The public support is not always there on the ground. It may be in urban areas, but a lot of people who are living with pronghorn near and in and around this corridor are not urbanites. There's also a lack of a sense of urgency, meaning these animals have been around a long time. Why do we think that this corridor is so important? And besides, we don't live in Grand Teton or near it, and we don't care about Grand Teton. We don't go to parks to recreate. And then finally, and what we see in many areas of the West, but perhaps even more broadly, is that there's a great deal of mistrust of the federal government. And so if some conservation action was to be coming from above, and it would be, we'll say, all right, we're just going to protect this corridor. That's all. But does it morph? Will it change? What happens down the road? And so, understandably, there's some distrust. So we plodded along doing our research studies, but we also tried to do things a little bit differently. And we garnered media coverage. National Geographic, Smithsonian, New York Times, a number of different places to try to get the message out more broadly to the American public, but also to the Wyoming public. We ran editorials in local Wyoming papers talking about why this would be good for Wyoming. After all, Wyoming had had the world's first national park, Yellowstone, first national monument, Devil's Tower, first national forest, Shoshone. Why shouldn't they have some protected corridor and showcase Wyoming? Some of the businesses in Jackson Hole started an annual party to celebrate the return of pronghorn. So we've got different businesses doing it. And just like San Juan Capistrano has its Return of the Swallow Festival, and Hinckley, Ohio has its Return of the Buzzard Festival, Jackson Hole has the Return of the Pronghorn, called Party for the Pronghorn. And the Teton County Commissioners unanimously wrote an appeal to Governor Friedenthal saying, Governor Dave, do something. This is important for us and our economy. And so we started working also with Department of Transportation, with the Forest Service, with the Park Service, with Wyoming Game and Fish to put up wayside exhibits, the most expensive of which is about $60,000. So these aren't trivial, and they'll probably all get shot up anyway, but it's a way to try to tout what some of the spectacular events are on the landscape in their backyard. And then it got better. A year and a half ago, 18 governors from the western states, there was no bipartisanship at all. It was unanimous that they supported this resolution to protect wildlife migration, corridors, and crucial habitat. And they set up 5 different committees. One was a science committee, which Mike Mitchell and Sanjan from Missoula are on. Scott Mills is on a climate change committee. Kim Berger is on an energy committee. And I'm also on the science one. And so that was either 5 or 6 from Missoula, so a disproportionate representation from here. The resolution had no teeth. This resolution had no teeth. But let's see, February 6th. I want to get this so it's not going so fast. Okay, so February 6th this year, 3 federal agencies put together a pledge of support. Park Service, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife Service put together a pledge. BLM did not sign it. And some of the criticism was, well, this letter is purely symbolic. I mean, you guys are all investing massive amounts of time and effort for 400 pronghorn. It's like, give me a break. 400 pronghorn and everybody's getting in such a tizzy? I mean, Wyoming has more pronghorn than people. There are more than 500,000 pronghorn in Wyoming. Why are we caring about 400? So, the criticism. This is a symbolic gesture. So what are symbols? Symbols come in lots of different ways, and they can motivate. And we know that they do motivate and they energize a public. And so, June 17th of this year, the Forest Service enacted legislation to protect their section, 45 miles long, 1 mile wide. And it gets better. Secretary Kempthorne came forth with not only $1 million, but he put a freeze on oil and gas leasing on BLM lands in the corridor. So there are reasons for optimism. Different groups can work together when the public wants it and demands it. So when I think about a symbol, I also think about a vision. And for me, I ask, why can't we do this in other areas? Why can't we do this in the Northern Rockies? Why can't we do this across the Yellowstone system? And so I think about being able to motivate people and to have at least one success may be the basis of trying to move this further along. And so with that, I'll say, can we have the lights on, please? And you guys have been a wonderful audience. Thanks. And if there are questions, I'd be happy to try to address them. Yes?
What are the important priorities for the Northern Rockies?
Well, the question is, what are the important priorities of the Northern Rockies? We have hosted several so I'm going to try to answer, but it's going to come out more political, and it's not intended. We've put together workshops with Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming to talk about migrations in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. I've been here only 10 months. I don't know. People who have been here longer can help you and tell you. But I think that using that model is a reason, should give us some hope, should give us some optimism. I can't answer your question. Yes?
Do you think it will be, your work has been easier because it was state lands and not private landowners, the ones that own the land on the corridor?
Okay, I'll repeat that. Good question. And I'm going to embellish it just a slight bit. The question is, was it easier for us to be able to do this because most of the land was public land? It was about 8% private where we were working. I think private land challenges are enormously difficult. There's no question. When part of the way we got some buy-in with some of the ranchers is that some of the environmental groups wanted to litigate against cattle grazing because through the Endangered Species Act, because the cattle were going to have a problem with the wolves and the bears. But they used pronghorn and said that cattle are going to affect pronghorn. We went to those ranchers and we said, subpoena us. We want our data. We would go to court because they're wrong and cattle are compatible at this level. So we can get some buy-in at times on private lands. But I also said, if I was a rancher or a landowner and somebody came and said, hey, we're going to run this through your property, how would I feel? And it's like, you know the answer, I would not feel good. So yeah, way more difficult with private lands. Massive challenge. Yes?
The Mongolian story, the next chapter there.
Good question. Very concise. The Mongolian story. Next chapter is? Good. We're bringing a Mongolian graduate student here that we just got funded to come here. He's helped us on the captures of adults. He helped us capture 40 calves this spring. Part of his thesis will be follow-up. He's employed currently Mongolian Academy of Sciences, and so we specifically wanted to do that because he was a rural guy working with the government. So that's part A. Part B is working with the local herders at that one workshop where we brought in about 60 people and the 2 governors. We went through priority. It was a 3-day workshop, priority setting, and we asked, do you care about saiga? How many saiga should there be? What is a target goal? And the consensus was, where there are 3,000, there should be at least 15,000. Next step, how do we get there? So these things take time, but we're not idle.
You mentioned the economic benefits of this path for the community, and I asked you what those are.
Economic benefits for Jackson. Jackson's a very wealthy community. Jackson loves its wildlife. Jackson's, the motto for Jackson is power of place, let it be. And so they're not promoting growth, they're promoting sustaining what they have. They don't want more people. Several different tour groups take people out to watch. They've tried to set up and to film the migration corridor. National Geographic Society is currently funding a walk through the corridor. That's happening this month. So lots of tangible, lots of indirect benefits by maintaining it as a first-class, first-rate area for wildlife.
So a follow-up to that then, do you think that those kind of benefits could be tangible in a more rural setting where you don't have communities so dedicated to wildlife protection?
So we've talked to the people in Sublette County, kind of the opposite end where the pronghorn end up in the wintertime. They have a museum. The museum is very interested in adding a migration wing. Whether it will happen or not is very unclear. These things are expensive, but the curators were very interested in that. Couple of the county commissioners which have changed over want the migration corridor to continue. I think that it's taken a while with a lot of the oil and gas boom changing the fabric of their community, that they've liked the rural community rather than the industrial. So they're trying to partner now more with Jackson and Teton County, the affluent one that they always had a very poor relationship with. And so wildlife is serving to mend a bunch of the past rifts and develop some positive relationships. In fact, after Kempthorne dedicated the $1 million, a local land trust from Sublette County put forth a program initiative for $5 million that they're calling Path of the Pronghorn for purchasing private lands and helping the private landowners. So that will also relate to Alina's question. Yes? Carol?
Capacity building in the pronghorn example, do you have a sense about the balance of capacity building and the success that you've had as an NGO lead versus a state or a federal agency lead?
Okay. The question, repeating it, not as concise as the prior.
Sorry.
Capacity building with the pronghorn example. Do I have a sense of the NGO role, non-government organization, versus an agency role, whether it would be state or federal? Federal role, there would be none. The feds are like the worst. NGOs are the second to the, they're pretty bad stuff too. It's like, they're not like me. You don't live here, go away. But we've been invested in that community now for 7 years, so they know us. I'm not sure that they like us, but they almost trust us. Not quite, but almost. State Fish and Game, on off, sometimes liked, sometimes disliked. Capacity building in terms of training or education, we haven't been doing it there. We've been doing outreach and communication, but we've hired a couple of locals at times too. So a little bit, but not a lot.
But do you feel that you've been able to do things that neither the state or the federal agency could do?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And why is that?
Okay, so have we, as an NGO, and I'll point out, I'm University of Montana now, but a lot of this was done when I was Wildlife Conservation Society. Carol's question was, what is it that we could do that the state and the feds could not? Couple of things. One is that we could dedicate scientists to working on the project to actually get data without the morass of all the responsibilities that go with the state agency or federal agency if you're not there as a scientist. So one, we could generate the science. Two, we had a lot of flexibility in terms of what we could say. There were no constraints. We could just talk freely. And so that gave us a real opportunity because we were not representing an agency. And so at times, and I know there are never muzzles put on agency people ever, and that's how we felt too. We felt good because there were no muzzles. Okay.
Has all the important work been done on what prompts pronghorn to migrate? So looking into the future, do you have any sense of the likelihood that, say, a climate change-induced phenomenon would prompt them to use a different corridor or stop migrating altogether?
Okay, good question. Good question. I'll repeat it. is there important work to be done on the causes of migration? And to what role might climate change impact migration? And I'm assuming you're talking about this one or more broadly?
I was talking specifically
This one? Okay. So climate change in some sense could be good for pronghorn because pronghorn don't like going through forests. And so if we lose some forests, pronghorn will be happier. On the other hand, if we weren't doing fire suppression, pronghorn would be happier because some of those trees would have burned. And so climate change is unlikely to really impact pronghorn in a negative way in and of itself if we're just talking temperature. And I know that there's certainly a lot more that goes into climate change than just that. In terms of the first part of your question, there are probably a lot of really important questions. There's certainly things that we don't have a good handle on, and I think most people don't, and that are what are the antecedents or what are the triggers for why animals migrate in the fall? It's not the hunting season that's doing it. And it's not deep snow, because some years they move before the snow. Some years it snows and some animals get trapped in Jackson Hole and they can't get out, and so then they starve. We think that the phenology of plants drives it in the spring, but we don't know what's doing it in the fall. So there are a lot of different questions. And some of these are just not basic science questions. For instance, if we try to find a way to work with industrialization and more people on the land, we know that pronghorn are fairly sedentary in the summer and in the winter. And so if there was to be surface occupancy of areas adjacent to the corridor, not in the corridor, but adjacent to it, the times that should happen is winter or summer when there's less disturbance rather than when they're moving through. And so there are a lot of reasons to still pursue the science on this because it can help very strongly meet management goals. Yes?
Regarding the populations that used to migrate, that you showed that the migratory populations have faded out, have the populations actually gone extinct, or are they just not migrating anymore? And follow up, are the land use changes such that it's gone forever, or could there be potential for restoration?
Okay. So the essence of the question is, where the corridors and the migration routes have been blocked, what does that mean for the pronghorn? Well, what it means is that they're not using those summer ranges anymore because those areas are severed. They're just gone, unavailable. And the second component of the question is, well, why? Has it been land use change? And the answer is yes, either massive dams, agricultural fields, or interstates with impenetrable fencing. Okay, so next on the agenda, I think, are posters and refreshments. Thank you, guys. You've been great.